All right. Well, we don't have Judd today, so I have no idea how to start the show. But
I know,
hey,
I
man,
know.
like we gotta make it happen.
Welcome to GTM Unfiltered, hosted by GTM veterans Judd, Craig Rosenberg, and Matt Amundson. We make talking business fun and sometimes funny. That's because we're always unscripted, unfiltered, and unlike anything else out there. Get ready.
As part of this show, I do an interview with Andy Raskin. For many of us, like the hero of I don't know. I would have said for years like the hero of messaging, but when you talk to him, it's like this idea of strategic narrative really hits, right? Which is it's like the story that guides your strategy for the company and your go-to-market
Yeah,
strategy. But
yeah,
dude, when I was doing the interview, I was dying. I'm like, I got to find out from Matt, like, if you took Andy's work on strategic narrative and you look at the examples he gives of Zuora, Salesforce, I love the Gong one.
yeah. The
I
Gong one's
read a
great.
lot. Yeah, and he has some others that he's mentioned, and I've read all his stuff and listened to stuff. Drift was another one where they just did a really good job of reframing the market. But I mean, I'm just going to talk. I mean, like, what do you think? I mean, what do you think of the interview, and what do you think of this whole idea around the strategic narrative and like, definitely a CMO veteran of Silicon Valley's take is what I'd love to hear from you on that.
Well, I mean, I've always admired Andy, and I've used the both his Medium post on the greatest sales deck ever created and the deck itself as an example many times, both internally and to people that I've done advisory for.
Yeah.
It's like a slice above what most people operate at, and
Yeah.
I am guilty of this all the time, all the time. Which is, I want to tell the story of my brand through the products and the value that the customers get. And oftentimes I find myself defaulting to, hey, let's tell the story of our products or our company through the voice of our customer, because I think that resonates or has resonated really well. But if you look at like, what are the companies, and companies that do that do very well. But what about the companies that are like, they kind of come out of nowhere and they're the paradigm shifting businesses? You and I talk about this a little bit offline. It's they capitalize on movements and they do a really good job of articulating that movement in the core of what their story is. And this is not like, it's not messaging, it's story. Why does this exist? Where is it going? Why do we build this? Because it informs this broader story, not just, hey, we came out with this new feature and now you can send emails faster, or you can serve ads faster. But it's because we believe in a vision of a world that looks like this. And he does such a good job of distilling that in a way that just makes total sense. It's one of those things where you kind of see it and you go, God, that's what I've been thinking, or God, everything that he says makes so much sense. But it's really hard to remove yourself from the minutia of the day to day. We're launching a product that does this. Let's go tell that story, instead of, this is another step in the direction towards creating the vision of our business as a reality. And when you articulate that reality and that vision, the new products that you launch should fall directly into that. And if they don't, then you shouldn't be launching them. And if they do, it should be so inherent to your audience of why you created it.
Yeah. Without going into detail on your behalf, I do, what's interesting about what you're up to right now from a COO perspective is like, you guys are in the face of a massive movement all around you.
Yeah.
And you guys have to somehow, get a hold of this and put your story into that. It's actually really exciting because there's a big movement there's bits and pieces of it everywhere. It's clearly happening. So there's a really cool opportunity for you guys to talk about what's really happening, and then your story. But it's big. And the thing with Zuora, I mean, that was big, right? The subscription economy is big, and it was happening already, and that's really exciting, man. I mean, so like, I'm going to enjoy, and we'll all enjoy watching your journey towards the strategic narrative where you are now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, not to be so transparent with what I'm working on a day-to-day basis, but this is this is what I'm spending probably 75% of my like free thinking time thinking about.
Yeah,
Is
I bet.
not just it's not, hey, how can we be doing a better job with ads? How can we be improving our CPAs or our cost per clicks? But or how do I get a better email open rate? It's like, how do I go tell this big story that resonates with a really wide audience and captures what we are right in the middle of from a data perspective, which is just this massive sea change. And that is, I think the taglines that he illustrated, whether it's, Salesforce and no more software, or the Gong example.
That was great. Yeah.
It's so great because it's so simple, and it's like you can just tell that to somebody who doesn't even know what you're talking about, but they're like, yeah, of course that makes sense.
Totally, man. So maybe I should, depending on when people listen to it. So the idea here is that, you're basically going to create a story around, it's a strategic narrative, a story of your company, why they exist, where the sort of tenets of it are simple, which is attack the old game, right? And to find this new game where winners are winning. They are already winning. Yeah. And put that into the story. And that's what you're just describing you're working on. And one thing that resonated was at the end of the interview when Andy said that, I forget, maybe it was the CEO, and they said, look, that guiding sort of strategic narrative allows people to make better decisions when I'm not in the room because they understand that story. That was pretty amazing right there. I don't know what you thought of that, but that was...
No, I agree. I think oftentimes people can think of their company vision as somewhat trivial, or, it's a nice thing to hang on a wall, but it should be the guiding principle to how all of your employees operate. And a good vision does that really well, because it helps define the products that you build, the type of marketing that you release into the world, the way you sell your products, what you talk about when you're talking about your company, whether you're selling it or just having a casual conversation about it. So I think, to your point and to the point of that CEO, it's this idea that, hey, I don't even need to be present because everyone understands this core kind of movement principle. I don't know how a better way to define it than that. And that's so inherently imbrued into everything that we do that it just makes conversation around the product, conversation around the brand, conversation around the way we make our investments really simple.
Yeah. Yeah. The one I'm sort of wrestling with, like topic wise, is because, I am, a fan of category, right? And category design. So those tenets, because I do like this idea of, like, you do want to make sure that your product is on the shelves when people go to buy ketchup. If you're ketchup, you want to make sure that you're on that shelf defined as ketchup. And the movement. I think ultimately you need both, or both. Did I say both? By the way, in your history to know me, Scott Albro tells me that I pronounce both with an L.
Yeah, you get an L in there sometimes.
Well, I mean, that's the kind of movement stuff, I'm thinking about here. But how do you think about category, and in particular in the context of all the things you just said? Is it and or?
I have a terrible answer, and I think it can be both. I think, where, like, and you and I have been a part of category workshops before, category creation workshops, or for an incumbent, categories are great, right? Because they help define your business and they make it really easy for you to talk about it. Whether you're like let's say you're a marketing automation system. You're like, hey, I'm a marketing automation system. Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Marketo. My name is Eloqua. My name is HubSpot, whatever. But when you're a marketing automation system that's being created right now, to go throw yourself into that world and go try to compete with people that may have a 20, 25 year lead on you, that's really challenging.
Yeah.
And so can you go create a new subcategory of marketing automation Or do you ride the wave of a movement and say something like, hey, you could think of me as marketing automation, sure, but like most marketing automations orbit the sun of a CRM. We're going to go out and orbit the sun of, let's say something crazy, like a Kafka stream. And
there he is. Wow. Okay. High impact. Yeah. High impact.
High impact. It would be very hard to sort of define yourself and see yourself, at least the way most marketers think, in the top right of a Gartner quadrant for marketing automation if you just centered around that one specific use case. So in that sense, if you said, hey, what we're seeing is everybody's moving to capturing events in their Kafka stream, we want to capitalize on that and offer real-time marketing by, sort of ingesting that data and then being able to react to it quickly. You're not really in a marketing automation category anymore. You're now defining a product that exists as a part of a movement. And I think even if you look back to, and I apologize for making so many marketing automation references, but it's a place where I've spent so much of my time. Like Marketo and Eloqua were actually part of a new movement because they capitalized on everybody moving to CRM in the cloud, and that changed everything. And it's odd because you may think of those as like the two sort of preeminent vendors in that space, along with HubSpot, obviously. And yet there is a whole, a graveyard of old marketing automation systems that existed long before those two that no longer could even really compete in that category. So, those companies came in, they rode a movement, they defined what that new marketing world would be utilizing their product, and they sort of pushed out the old stuff. So that's why I say it could be you're either riding the wave of a movement, or you're capitalizing, or you're capitalizing on an incumbent category and riding a wave of a movement into it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Actually, not that that's surprising. When people say actually at the end, do they mean they're surprised that it made sense? Is that what that implies when I say that?
Sometimes it feels that way. But not in that case. Not in that case.
Okay, by the way, on a total side note, do kids sit in first class or no?
I see it very infrequently, I would love to put my daughter in first class. I'm not sure how I feel about Mikey being in first class, but then again, whether it's my daughter's 8th or 16th birthday, I'd just love to buy her a BMW 3 Series if that's what she wanted. So I would say no, and I think it's just not something I see all that frequently.
Yeah, I wonder though if it's taboo. I got to look that up. Maybe I'll ask ChatGPT.
Well, if we were if we wanted to use some statistics to get specific, I mean. Let's think about a holiday film. You were talking about a Christmas movie the other week with Anna.
Man.
How about Home Alone? The kids sit in the back.
That's right.
The parents are up front in first class.
Now, Home Alone is a Christmas movie, right?
Yes, in every aspect.
That's a no-brainer. Unlike Die Hard, that's a no-brainer. Yeah, there's all right.
Die Hard, could go either way.
Yeah, sorry. I just, I had to ask you that. Fun fact on knowing your audience. So I've been re-binging Narcos. You watch Narcos?
I've seen season 1.
I mean, the season, that doesn't count. I mean, you didn't go through the 6th season. That tells me you didn't love it.
Yeah, just other stuff came up. I guess I really enjoyed it.
No, because I was just the other night at dinner. We were with some other folks, and I turned and I started telling them about Narcos, and I learned that you have to understand the persona of who you're selling to, and it was my wife too, and her friend. I started telling them about Narcos, and literally they both just started eating again. I mean, I could not. That was a plane that did not land. Okay. Now, why am I bringing that up? Well, one is because they keep teasing me about whether, they say, oh, Craig, how was the New Year's Narcos watch-a-thon? Because literally I just kept going, why don't you guys want to talk about Narcos, whatever? They had no idea what I was saying about. But that's one reason it's in my head. The other one, though, is I was thinking about when we were talking about strategic narratives and category and all that, was just, knowing who you're talking to and who you're trying to sell to. I mean, like, that was probably the wrong persona to bring up Narcos.
Yeah,
I think
potentially. Although it's always hard to know people's like tastes, it's hard to know.
That's true, unless you have the data on them. So maybe I'll do some research beforehand. And then last fun fact, I brought up ChatGPT because I've been using it for finding data points for us, and like having some fun going in there and doing that. I do need to continue to refine my search stuff, but like, I've been going in there and typing in, what's the latest data on RevOps, and coming back to this thing comes back with some really interesting stuff. I don't know. Have you been using it for any of your sort of day to day, or besides?
I've been using, yeah. Interestingly enough, I've been using it prior to the year 2024, but I'm glad that you're finally on and using it. It seems to be a popular platform. So I know
hey, man, it might take me a little time. I am a laggard. According to Gartner, I fall into the laggard category, but when I do come around, I become a prolific user. So you got to give me that.
There you go. So I know that there's a lot of chatter lately around like SEO and the value of SEO. I'll leave the listeners with this. If you're feeling like Google is becoming less important right now, a lot of the GPTs, whether it's ChatGPT from OpenAI or others, are using what's being indexed in Google to turn up their results. So it is very important for SEO because the next generation of search is going to be done via artificial intelligence, and your scorecard on a Google, page one search results is going to be repopulated in these GPT platforms. So if you're like, Google less valuable, everybody's moving to ChatGPT, at least for the short term, they're consuming a lot of their content from search. So being optimized for SEO on Google is going to pay dividends for you in terms of how people are searching for your products in ChatGPT.
Yeah, actually, that brings up a good point. Thank you for taking that remark of my initial foray into ChatGPT into something actionable. But is there going to be now are all the SEO consultants going to be GPT consultants? Because you have to figure out how you position yourself into those search results, right? Is that going to be a thing?
Right now, it's going to be a thing. Right now, there's no real strategy for it other than it seems to be, a bleed over from Google and Bing directly into these platforms. But at some point that will probably change, and it'll be yet another thing that marketers will, wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air, thinking about how they're going to solve.
Boom. There we go. All right, dude. It was good hanging out. We'll have Judd next time. We'll have the whole crew, but I appreciate you. And by the way, I'm not sure whose view is better. Oh, I have the curtain up. It's a nice day in Foster City today.
I'm glary in the city, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's nice, but then it's cold at night. But anyway, good hanging out, man. And we'll see everyone next week. It's always fun to talk games, so appreciate you.
Yeah. See you next week. Bye, guys.
One of the things that I love about doing the podcast, I don't know if you feel the same way, is like, it's like this vehicle for me to finally talk to the people I've been admiring from afar, from either a content or speaking perspective. It's like the ultimate benefit of this job. And in this case, that is absolutely true. Today's guest is, I can only hope that I do justice to the stuff that I've read and watched of our guests today over the years. But today's guest had years of experience in leadership, marketing leadership, product marketing, et-cetera. And for me, broke out in my mind when he wrote one of the most iconic blog posts or piece of content in my opinion, in B2B go-to-market history, which was called The Greatest Sales Deck Ever Seen. And that was traded back and forth for years. I still pass it back and forth. And that was my exposure to Andy, which led me to follow him over the years. He is like, I think, the king of strategic narrative particularly for tech companies, right? This is like the high level story that powers your strategy and your success. And he's done it for Salesforce, Uber, IBM, VMware, the titans of our industry. And if you watch or look at his work, you'll be as amazed as me. The most recent one that is like very addicting video is Goodbye Product, Hello Movement, which we'll put in the show notes that you can watch. But look, the fact is a lot of us over the years, since that sort of moment of content, that content highlight of the greatest sales deck ever, have been following you over the years. And so it's my pleasure today to have Andy Raskin on the show. And Andy, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks you. I was very humbled by the introduction, and great to talk with you, Craig.
See, I was hoping, gosh, that worked. I did have one where she had to fill in a couple holes, but I try to make them heartfeartelt, and that is true.
You mean you introduced somebody where she was like, "Hey, actually, you forgot this, this, and this."
Yeah.
I can understand that. I think you did a great job, though. Thank you.
I appreciate it. So we got a lot to talk about, but like the way I like to start things is this big question, which is, is there something in the market today where the market thinks they're doing something right, or that something is standard, or it's a best practice, and they're actually wrong, and they're doing it wrong, they just don't know it? And what is that? What should they do about it? And I like to start with that. So Andy, I'm going to pose that question to you as to start us off today.
Well, I don't think I would ever say anyone's doing anything wrong, for sure, because there's just so much context that, I think to say like, here's the way to do it in every single case is just, obviously asking for some exceptions and all that. But I can talk to my experience, which was around kind of how we structure the company pitch and mission. So I was a founder back in the .com years. So I started out as an engineer. Friend and I had an idea for an app. This was a, web app. We coded in using like Microsoft Visual Studio, basically a Microsoft Windows app. And we thought, hey, well, let's try and get some users. We put it out there. We got some users. We thought, okay, let's see if we can get some VC money. We wrote a pitch. We sent the pitch out, and the reaction was really bad. And one of the investors wrote back, "Listen, Andy, I rate every plan I get on a scale of 1 to 10, and yours is a 1." And next to the one, he wrote in parentheses, "worst," in case we thought maybe 1 was like the top of his scale. So, and then he wrote in the margin, this is when they would print it out and mail it back to you. He wrote, "not a compelling story." And I didn't pay much attention to that until a few weeks later, I was walking by this Barnes and Noble, and I saw a sign in the window that said, "For anyone who wants to tell a compelling story." And there's this arrow pointing to this stack of books. And the books turned out to be about screenwriting, which was something I knew nothing about. I mean, I'd seen movies, obviously, but I didn't know anything about the code of screenwriting. And so I read these books, and the first thing I realized was that that a movie is a pitch. What is Star Wars a pitch for? It's a pitch for the idea that, it's a pitch for really a movement. It's a pitch for abandoning the old way of like, when Luke starts out, he's kind of like self-centered. He just wants to have adventures, and embracing this new mindset of kind of selflessness and introspection, embracing the Force or trusting the Force in their terms. And that's the new way to win. Look at any other movie. There's this similar kind of old game, embracing of a new mindset, new game shift that happens for the main character. And I realized that was very different from how I was taught to pitch something. The way that I was taught to pitch was what I call the arrogant doctor, which is okay, you have a problem, I have or pain, I have this treatment solution, and let me tell you why it's better than the other solutions. This was different. It was about, hey, there's this shift, everything's based on. At the same time, I wasn't making a movie. I was trying to pitch a business. So what applies, what doesn't apply? I did the best I could and rewrote our pitch, and we started getting interest. And then a couple of years later, maybe a year after that, I see Benioff at launch Salesforce doing exactly the same thing. He's saying, hey, there was this old mindset of software defined as software where we own and operate it. And now there's this new one called the cloud. And that's what we're all about. We're championing that movement. So it's this shift from this arrogant doctor approach, which I think is the approach that most of us are trained in, including me, to this other thing, which is more this like movement champion, where the product is still really important, but it's in service of a bigger movement. It almost feels like the company is evangelizing a movement rather than a product. And I think that's, when you ask like, what are people doing wrong? I wouldn't say that the arrogant doctor is necessarily wrong in every case, but I think just a lot of companies have now come to this other way and found a lot of success in it.
Yeah, that is amazing. Of all the things I wrote down from when we talked and from listening to you, the arrogant doctor is one of my favorite ones, and I can't believe that I didn't have it in my notes. Question for you is actually, when you talk about so are there any other like movements that you could point to for me that would be really interesting? Because those two, the Salesforce is like, the way you talk about Benioff is really interesting. Let me make the question more complicated, because when we talked, there was this interesting thing about category versus movement. And you said something which was, well, there was already an SFA and a CRM category. That wasn't a new category. That was a movement. And I don't, so I asked for an example, then I talked about the Salesforce thing. So I gave you two things. So you have to parse it out and figure out what you want to answer. Both things were on my mind when you were talking.
There's a kind of idea, I think, in the go-to-market world anyway, that we have a choice. We have two choices. One is we are launching a product that's a competitor in an existing category, and we're going to just basically talk about why we're better for a certain segment of buyer than the other products in that category. Or we're going to define a new category. And we're going to, we're not going to compare ourselves to anyone. We're a totally new animal. And I'd say my approach is a little bit more aligns to the totally, we're a new animal, right? Because like this new game, this new mindset, we're saying, hey, we're a tool purpose built for this and nobody else is. But that category thing, that the metaphor there is really the supermarket shelf. It's, hey, are we in the soup aisle, or are we asking the supermarket to create a new aisle for us, or new area of the shelf? And I think there is another, like, we maybe let go of that metaphor and just talk about the movement. I think, did Benioff create a new category? Well, I don't know. You could say he did, in that it was online, web-based CRM. You could say that he didn't, in that it was already CRM. Either way, it almost is irrelevant, right? He's created this movement and people wanted to jump on board. Is that a new category? Who cares? And that's kind of how I think about it.
Right. No, that absolutely makes sense. So that the movement thing really resonates, and with Matt, who you met, like that really hit him. I've been, ever since we talked, been throwing it at people. But like, I'm just trying to figure out, like, I know this is probably in your secret sauce, but as you're is this one of the first things you do, right? Is, how do you figure this out? Like, how do you, or is it in there and you always knew it was there, you just didn't embrace it? Because the gravitational pull, as you said, is towards the arrogant doctor. That's like, and what you're probably doing a lot of the times when you're working with people is trying to break them out of that. I am, like, just on things like creating content on LinkedIn or on blog posts, just trying to get people, hey, don't talk about like what's happening in your buyer's world. Just trying to change that mindset. That has to be hard.
I never tried to dissuade people from using the arrogant doctor. If that's working for you, great. I found that it wasn't working for me for, I think, a few reasons. It's one thing if we're talking about a can of soup and we're talking about how it's different from the other, or, it's more healthy or it's gluten-free or whatever it is, right? But the products that I was marketing when I was getting involved in, B2B SaaS, these were sprawling platforms with thousands of features that are, and they're not static. So like, they're not like the soup that's going to not be changing every. They're changing like constantly. So to say that ours was better because we had this feature or that feature, it just like that was obsolete in a week. And also the other folks could say, the competitors could say, we have that and they don't. And it would be very hard, unlike the can of soup, for the buyer to kind of suss out whose claims hold water, because these are very complex products. So I think it was really that dynamic that led me also to this approach, and that people who are experiencing that kind of this approach resonates with them. You asked about where do we find it, and should this be, I think you were kind of asking, like, should this be obvious from day one when we found the company, or is it something that we figure out over time? And I
Yeah.
think it is, in my experience, it really seems to be something we figure out over time. One of the things that, I mean, sure, we may have an idea of it at the beginning and maybe go with that, but it's usually wrong or has to change, I find. And I feel like the sweet spot for first defining it is somewhere around like the late A, B stage. This is the stage where the company is shifting from, one founder put it to me this way. He said, we've had tremendous success so far and we're growing, but all that growth has been like brute force of the founders. And now it can't be that way if we're going to achieve our growth targets. I'm not going to be in every sales call. I'm not going to be in every product discussion. Because we want this narrative not only to be a go-to-market thing, but also to lead product and be the North Star for that as well. So one of the things I do when I work with teams is have them start asking customers a lot of questions. And the questions aren't so much like, well, what do you like about our product? What don't you like about our product? And those are valuable things to know too. But here, what I'm really trying to get is how have you seen your world, meaning the buyer, you have seen your world change such that what we've given you is life and death urgent? And often I'll find that question gives us some good fodder for getting
That's
to
great.
a narrative that has some juice. Because the last thing we want to do is talk about some people will say to me, hey, I framed the narrative about an old game, a new game, about a movement, and didn't work. And usually what I find is they've just picked something so big and obvious that it's sort of wasting people's time. We're really looking for something that has life and death stakes for the buyer, the way that the Benioffs did and some of the other great ones did that I love to look at.
That's perfect. All right, so that was my terrible questions are all a lead into to where we're going here. So you brought it up. So the narrative is we attack the old game, right, and name the new game. And the narrative is this new formula for winning in a mission critical, our life's on the line type of thing. That's essentially, if we think about the narrative structure, is that a simple way to think about it? And also, is that the way I should have asked the first question? But go ahead.
I'll leave the question asking to you, since you're the expert here. But the answering, yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to sum it up. There's of course lots of qualities or principles I find come into play around what makes a good old game, new game shift. that really defines a movement that's going to hit home. Uh, some of those we talked about, meaning the stakes are really high.
Yeah.
One is brevity. So, no software, or he said at the beginning, Benioff said, it's the end of software. Now it's the cloud. These are very short, uh, you know, descriptions of a new mindset. He's not going into a whole paper about it, right? You don't have to. I mean, he could, and I'm sure they did, but you don't need that. The words stand on their own. I'll give you another example. Gong, which is a team that I worked with, they came out of the gate and kind of gangbusters right away, and they
Yeah.
got to this Series B point, but they were still kind of seen as a tool for sales enablement, meaning not for the sales leader. And their salespeople would often have trouble getting above that sales enablement sort of threshold. And Amit Bendoff, when he reached out to me, said, "Hey, listen, we're going to be a big company. That, like, the trajectory is there." But they were right at this Series B point. I think this was like 2018. And he said, "How big, I think, depends on how we nail the narrative. And particularly, can we nail it in a way that feels like we're relevant to these, to CROs, to leadership there." And so, up to that point, they had been talking about adding science to sales, and that was landing them in this enablement place. And then, so I talked with Amit, like, well, what is this movement you're championing, really? We talked about it a lot, and where we came to was, hey, the old way was, he eventually came to opinions that, even if you have Salesforce, you're, if I was going to ask, well, why did you lose that deal? Well, your data, is basically the salesperson, if they bothered to do it at all, what they went in and did the pull down on the lost deal reason, oh, I wasn't in the zone, or, whatever the reason
Yeah.
they think. And so it's their opinion. And he's saying, hey, the new winners are all going on, a view of reality. And of course, that's what Gong is offering. So this goodbye opinions, hello reality, again, very concise, and like so concise that it's almost too it feels like it's like too general, but the concision is actually where I think the power comes from.
Yeah, one of the things too, I'll just piggyback that when you talk about Gong, and part of how that story, the narrative really stuck was because, Amit really talks about it from a personal perspective. Is that a good way to put, like, there's this, he really describes his own journey. And look, I used to be an analyst, so I know this. Amit would tell me his story for 20 minutes and he had me. And
Exactly.
so I know that, yeah,
Exactly. He would talk about, and this was, he told me the same story, in the, hey, like, if I want to find, I was in this company, I think he was running marketing. I think he'd run marketing before that. And he would ask, these questions like, why are we losing deals, or what, and it was all opinions. And it was so much in contrast to the other functions in the business, which had already shifted over to this much more analytical view. I'm saying analytical, not data, because Salesforce has data. Uh, it's just opinion. It's just that data is a reflection of opinions. That was one reason we didn't say, like, goodbye opinions, hello data. It was that we wanted data that was a view of reality.
yeah, I love that. Yeah, that really stuck with me. I think about that all the time, particularly because I hear from founders all the time when they can tell that good story about why they even just built the company. That's a really good start,
Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
and I could see that.
Also related to that too, what you're kind of one pushback sometimes people have about saying, hey, there was an old way to do things and there's a new way, is we're kind of saying to them, hey, you're doing it in the old way, you're wrong. So how do we
Right.
deliver that message in a way that's not like, hey, you're wrong, and make them defensive and feel bad? And one ideal way is what Amit did, which is to say, hey, this is how I used to do it. And so it's not you that we all did it that way. We all were doing it in
Right.
that old way.
Right. Perfect. And then you mentioned something else that I know I'm trying to figure out where I saw it in your best practices or in your past work, which is the narrative should allow you to go wider in the stakeholder map. I think it like in the case of Gong, we needed to get higher. The narrative allowed us to go do that. So tell me more about that. That is a common
Yeah.
issue,
Yeah.
frankly, with a lot of folks.
So there's a few versions of what you mean by going, I think, wider or higher. So first of all, there's the going higher, which is a very common thing where we're selling to practitioners, and somehow the company starts growing. Our solution gets bigger, and now we're looking to sell to C-suite or those people up higher in the
Right.
chain who don't experience the direct pains of the practitioner
Yeah.
and the user of the SaaS product. And so I think the narrative is really ideally suited for selling to those people because again, we're trying to build in what are the life and death stakes for them as a company and tying this practitioner's work to that. It's really giving the practitioner also a way to sell up. But there are
Yeah.
other versions of this. You're really talking about the multiple personas issue, and that can be personas in terms of roles. So we for instance, we want to sell to multiple roles, or we want to sell to multiple verticals. So and we have a choice here. We can build a separate story for each of them. The whole problem with that is that we kind of come off as pretty disjointed, and we don't. I have to
Right.
know who you are in order to tell you who we are. That's hard, especially if we have a joint audience of multiple of them. Sales call that's got different folks in the room. Um, but the other way is, can we tell a story that has a glue between all that, where there's this kind of central glue that that ties together all the stories for them? And my model here is Zuora. So Zuora, their narrative was famously this: hey, goodbye transactions. We used to want to buy things. Now people want to subscribe to things. There were this subscription economy. So
Yeah.
that's their high level narrative. And I saw they had a conference, this was a while back, where they had sessions for different personas, because when they're selling, they're selling to someone like Ford. They're having to talk to like the chief product officer and the head of finance and IT, lots of different folks. And so they had sessions that were specifically geared to each of these roles. And the way they started each of the sessions was to say, okay, we have this, here's this subscription economy, this is happening. How does that change your role? So for instance, for the head of finance, well, you're going to move from like a bookkeeper to like a kind of business enabler, uh, because you of course it's nice when we make the thing they're going to sound a lot more important and strategic.
Yeah.
But I think it was
Yeah.
true in this case, and they did that for each of the personas. I think I can't remember all of them, but for each of the personas, they had a kind of from to transition that this higher level shift had caused in their role and their particular area. And I found that this brought it home real fast. And so what I do with a lot of teams where they're trying to do this is, once we introduce this high level shift, we talk about, well, how is this shift playing out for the multiple different personas that are relevant here. Another way to put it is, why are each of them now forced to jump on this new bandwagon?
So I'm trying. Yeah, this is funny because every time you say something, I'm triggered by something I remember from you. Oh, here was, as you talked about this, the forcing on the bandwagon. But for what I understand on your successful strategic narrative formulas is, you want to have winners who are already in the movement successfully, or some parallel to the movie. And, I think Zwara used Netflix, right, as like a proxy there. But like, yeah, that was the first thing I thought of as you were saying. That's something I think a lot of people have trouble embracing, which is core, I think, from hearing and reading your stuff over the last
Yeah,
10 to
the
12
the
years.
the traditional approach is to say, hey, here are our success stories. Here are the success stories of people who are using our stuff. And so, if like let's say we're new, like we're just coming into the market, well, we don't have any, and of
Right.
course, having success stories of people using your stuff is very important, and but it has a different role to play. What you're talking about is, I think, gets to this idea of the life and death stakes. So what we want to show is that this old game, new game shift, that jumping on and abandoning the old mindset and taking on the new one. So in the case of Zuora, say, uh, stop selling things on one-off purchases and start offering subscriptions. It wasn't only Netflix, but also they would cite Spotify and even
Yeah.
Uber and places like this, would
Right.
not literally subscription, but subscription like services. Instead of buying a car, you're going to do this. Um, they're showing examples of where this mindset is creating the difference between winners and losers. And that's something we can often do even without having any customers.
That is so true. I love it. Okay, so God, there's a million things. So everything you said there, everyone can find in your content. Is there anything from that we didn't talk about as you think about goodbye product, hello movement, and the things you're talking about today that we want to make sure we get on the table before we end the podcast? Any insights there on this, your big movement that we didn't get a chance to cover?
Well, I think the name of your podcast is Go to Market Unfiltered. And I think the narrative is, and the way I even talk about it, the context is go to market, sales, marketing. But where I see this be really successful is where it's not just sales and marketing. Where I see it be successful, I hear the CEO tell me, as Amit did at Gong, like, hey, this narrative became the filter that we use for evaluating new product features. So we get a lot of, told me, we get a lot of requests for features from users and others. And, but is it like a computerized opinion, or is it some view of reality? And that became, it was like a high level filter. I heard from Tien at Zuora, like this narrative became really the filter for investors immediately. Like, do you believe in this subscription economy? You're going to invest in us. If you don't, you're not. And it just became very clear.
Right.
Same for, there's a CEO I worked with named Kelly Watkins. Kelly was a senior person in marketing at Slack, and then she became a CEO at a company called Abstract. She told me that this narrative became really the North Star for everyone in her company, product, finance, HR, for making decisions when she wasn't in the room. And I think this is, this is why I think that the building of this narrative is not just a go-to-market thing, but a company thing, a CEO thing. That the go-to-market team, of course, has a huge role to play here, but it's not just them. And don't we want that alignment across all the teams?
See, now that's a big strategic way to end the interview. That was perfectly said. And I just want to say, I probably could spend 3 hours with you. So I had to choose. And as you could tell, the minute you started talking, I was getting triggered. I was off, like, making questions up as I went, because everything that I've seen from you was sort of coming to light as you were talking. And that was awesome for me. And I hope it was great for the listeners
I hope so
and
too.
the walkthrough viewers. But I just want to say thank you very much, man. You're an icon to me. And like, you don't disappoint every time I talk to you. I learn from you and get inspired. And I'm sure our viewers and listeners will too. So thank you again, Andy.
Oh, thanks so much, Craig. It was great talking with you. I love the questions. Keep it up.
I appreciate it. And we'll have a lot of, the key links that you gave me and some other stuff in the show notes so that people will know where to find your content. And I love it. So thank you again.
Thanks for tuning in to GTM Unfiltered. To hear our innovative insights and strategies, visit gtmunfiltered.com. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time.